Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 181 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, also known as the Strolling Astronomer. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it going. If you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can find out more by going to www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. If you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $22 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now a very special episode with Comet discoverer Alan Hale. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. And today we have a very, very special guest with us. Today we have Alan Hale, co-discoverer of that famous comet Hale-Bopp. Welcome to the podcast, Alan.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, now you've had quite the professional career prior to 1995 when the comet was discovered. I mean, you get this straight. You graduated from the Naval Academy?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. And then I worked at JPL. You worked at JPL as well. You worked in the Deep Space Network on the Voyager 2 encounter.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And you went to New Mexico State University where you got your master's and PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And then you founded the Southwest Institute of Space Research in 1993. Now it's known as Earthrise.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. And that was all before the comet discovery.
That is right.
Wow. So how did that change your life?
I guess the best way to summarize it is that it allowed me to have the career that I didn't quite ever get to have, at least I would not have had otherwise. I took some detours along the way, some of which you recounted in that little description you just gave. So when it came to my contemporaries with the newly minted PhDs and stuff, I was behind the curve, so to speak, because I had all these detours. And by the time I had my PhD, I had a family. I had one child. Actually, my second child was born right after I defended. So I wasn't free and flexible to go move around like PhDs are young PhDs are expected to be able to do. So that's what kind of forced me to start my own organization, start doing research and education.
Okay.
And that's when I happened to stumble across a certain object in the sky one night. And
now were you hunting for a comet?
No.
Okay.
It was an accidental discovery. Now, I've been observing comets ever since I was 11 years old. I mean, that's I got my first telescope when I was 11. I saw my first comet with it 2 weeks later. And then
what comet was that?
That was Comet Tago Sato Kosaka.
Okay.
In early 1970. And then it was just 2 months later that comet Bennett appeared, and that was one of the 20th century's great comets.
Yeah, that was my first comet.
Yeah, and that was, if you saw that, then that was a truly spectacular sight to behold.
Yes, it was.
And that's kind of what got me hooked. So here I've seen, Tago Gosaka was faintly visible to the naked eye. Bennett was a beautiful, bright comet, easily visible to the naked eye. And I go, oh, wow, these bright comets come by all the time.
Yeah.
Well, okay. But that turned out not to be quite so true. I just happened to come into activity right at the very fortuitous time. And by that time, I was hooked. So I started to observe every comet that I could. Most of them are very dim and dinky ones, but I've seen the bright ones that came along as well. And I decided I did want to be cool to have one named after me, so I started hunting for them on an occasional basis and was never successful. And then while I was in graduate school, and I was living kind of far enough out away from the city that I could observe from the backyard, I hunted for comets on a very systematic basis for several years. I came close a couple of times. Actually had one taken away from me by bad weather at the wrong time.
No.
And then once I got my doctorate and had to really start working for a living, and now with two small kids, I kind of said, okay, well, that was a nice idea, but I'm going to have to just put all comet hunting and everything on the back burner. I'll still observe the ones that are around that I know about.
What type of equipment were you using at that time?
By that time, I had the Me DS16 16-inch Newtonian.
Oh, wow.
That I still use. I still use that instrument. As fact, as most recently as this morning.
Oh my.
Yeah. I'm a little bit sleep deprived because I was up half the night last night. But
yeah, there's a few comets in the sky right now.
Yes, there are. And so I had given up on comet hunting, and then what happens is I stumble across one without even looking for it or thinking about it. And not only do I stumble across a comet, I just stumble across the one that everybody remembers, or at least everybody above a certain age remembers.
Right. Pretty amazing. Yeah. Now Tom Bott was amateur astronomer.
Yes, he was. And who in fact had never seen a comet before.
Really? I didn't know that.
He told me. I did not know Tom before the discovery, but obviously, we met and got to know each other pretty well during the time afterwards. And he'd been an amateur astronomer for most of his life,
right?
But he had never seen a comet. And the first comet he ever saw was one that he kind of stumbled across as well, just like I did. And
what you guys did doesn't happen anymore.
No, it really doesn't. Not with the surveys.
Yeah, it's just, Don Mackles was a good friend of mine, and all the comets he discovered, and David Levy, all the ones he discovered, and things like that. Now they're all named after sky surveys.
That's right. I knew Don quite well. I know David quite well. I confirmed several discoveries of both of them.
Right.
And I last saw Don at the Riverside Conference in California, 6 years ago, 2018.
Okay, one of the last ones.
Yes. In fact, that was the last one I think that was held at Camp Oaks.
Yeah.
And he told me that he was still hunting. And I wished him good luck, but I didn't think he would find anything with all the surveys that are going on right now. And lo and behold, a few months later, he did find one. The only visual comet discovered visually within the last decade was the one that he found later that year.
Right.
And
he's a good guy. I miss him.
Yes, he was. Sorry to hear of his passing. I known him so well. David's. I don't know if David still hunts or not. I know he's just doing a lot of outreach and work stuff. But I guess there are some people that still do the visual hunting. I wish him well, but in all the surveys going on right now,
it's tough.
Yeah. And it's only going to get even more intense. The Vera Rubin survey that's going to go online in South America here within the next 2 or 3 years, that's going to be surveying the entire sky visible from Chile down to 24th magnitude every 2 or 3 nights. So,
yeah. So what are you currently working on?
I'm kind of semi-retired right now, and by that I mean I'm not being paid for anything. I mean,
Okay.
other than I do some occasional freelance writing. I'm involved with the Las Cumbres Observatory, which is a global network of remotely controlled telescopes that are cited as some of the top observatory sites in the world. I mean, they have telescopes at McDonald Observatory in Texas, at Siding Spring, New South Wales, Cerro Tololo in Chile, Haleakala in Hawaii, South Africa, Tenerife in the Canary Islands. The ones I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay.
So I do a lot of imaging work with those telescopes, which is a nice contrast to the visual work. As I mentioned earlier, I was out visually observing comets this morning when it was 20 degrees or colder here in the winter, here in the mountains, and I'm all bundled up.
Yeah.
And my knees are aching and my back is aching and stuff. Whereas when I want to take images, I sit here in the living room right where I'm sitting right now, and I just call up the webpage for the LCO and order up observations, and maybe a few hours later, here they are.
Yeah.
So I do whatever analysis I need to do on them. So,
are you doing certain type of studies or programs?
Mainly I do astrometric work for comets. I do, if there are objects on the Minor Planet Center's possible comet confirmation page or their near-Earth object confirmation page that are bright enough for me to get with the telescopes that I have at my disposal, I will try to get images of those and do the astrometry, so at least their discoveries can be reported properly. I've got 2 such objects that I'm following right now. The big thing that I'm kind of, I guess, I don't like to say proud of, but I'm kind of pleased with, was back in August, I made the recovery of Comet Olbers.
Oh.
Which is one of the Halley-type comets that's returning this year through perihelion in June. Last time Olbers returned was in 1956, 2 years before I was born. And I started trying to recover that with the LCO scopes back in 2022, and I tried about once a month and never saw anything, and then it was in conjunction with the sun middle of last year, but towards around June or July, it started reappearing in the morning sky. I started going again. And on August 24th, I took 2 images with one of the 1 meter LCO scopes at Siding Spring, found an object. I was able to locate that on images I'd taken about a week and a half earlier, then I continued to order up images over the next several days, got it on every single image I took, and made the recovery.
And is that what you were looking for at the time?
Yes, I was. I was specifically looking to try to recover Comet Olbers. I wanted that comet for some reason. I just think it's the connection to, like I say, 2 years before I was born. My partner's parents, Vicky's my partner. Her parents were actually married right at the time it was visible in the sky.
Okay.
And she was conceived just after the final observations of that comet were made. So,
oh my! So that there's a little deep interest in that comet for you.
Yeah. So, I've been imaging it on a fairly regular basis ever since recovery. Last imaged it about a week and a half ago. It's up to about 16th magnitude right now.
Oh my!
Definitely showing comet. It's definitely a comet. I mean, it's showing a coma tail and everything. And I'm hoping to pick it up visually by perhaps sometime next month.
Okay. Now, your current equipment, you mentioned the 16-inch. Is that your main telescope right now?
That is my main one. I do have a couple of others. I have an 8-inch Meade Newtonian that I purchased as a graduation present to myself when I graduated from the Naval Academy. 1980. That was quite a while ago.
Oh my!
I don't use that telescope much anymore, but I do it set up on occasion. I do have a smaller one, a Schmidt cast, like a 4-inch Schmidt cast from me that I actually used at that Riverside conference I mentioned a while back.
Okay.
And that's a very portable telescope.
Right.
So I got that for the ease and portability. And I use that for some of the brighter objects or what have you. For if I'm going to be traveling somewhere, for example, I'll be taking that with me to Texas for the solar eclipse in April. So
Okay. Yeah, the 16-inch is a little bit too big to lug around.
yeah, I've done it. I have transported that thing around back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I no longer do that. I have
Mm-hmm.
I keep it in a kind of what I call a lower building, a separate building on my property here that's about 100-yard walk away.
Okay.
Except now that my knees and back are complaining, I actually drive a little scooter down to it now. But
There you go. I understand that.
yeah, I'll walk there. I have a weight machine in that building, and in fact, a little later today, I'll walk down and hit the weights. But at night, especially here in the wintertime, no, I'll drive down there. So,
Okay.
but I keep the telescope in there and I wheel it out. I have a little concrete slab, and I'll wheel it out, do whatever I'm doing with it, and wheel it back in. So
Now, is that mostly for visual work, or do you do astrophotography with it?
no, that's strictly a visual instrument.
Okay. So you still put your eye to the eyepiece.
Yeah, I do. In fact, that's what I was doing
Thank
this
you for
morning.
that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
But we're a dying breed, I think.
I think so, but
Yeah.
it's fun. It's
Yeah.
fun. It's still something I still enjoy doing.
Oh yeah.
I may not be keeping it up for too much longer. My my body's really starting to complain about a lot of things.
Mhm.
So I had actually planned some time ago that in 2024, once Pons, Brooks, and Olbers were gone, I might, if not hang it up completely, but go down to a much reduced level. But then Comet Suchinchan and Atlas happened to be discovered.
Right.
And that's shows at least the potential to be something really bright and spectacular later this year. We'll have to see if it lives up to that potential. But
There's always going to be another comet of the century, you know?
yeah.
So yeah, speaking of that, comets for this year are actually pretty interesting.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, we got some nice ones. You mentioned Pons Brooks.
Which just underwent a new outburst.
Yeah.
Within the last 48 hours or so. I haven't seen it, but I've seen images of it. That comet's actually getting very difficult for me to access from where I'm at. Like from where I have that 16-inch set up, I have trees in that direction pretty low. So I think after the moon, I can transport one of those smaller telescopes to a place that gives me a more direct view of it. So I'm hoping to see it then. There's, of course, Olbers. Of course, Suchinchan Atlas will be bright. By the way, that was one of the comets I looked at this morning visually.
Oh, okay.
It was about 13 and a half. So
nice.
Which, considering that perihelion is not until September, late September, is actually pretty good.
Yeah. So you mentioned the upcoming total solar eclipse. What are your plans?
I'm going to Kerrville, Texas.
Okay.
I have made arrangements with there's a university there. Private, I think it's a Lutheran university. Anyway, they have a 16-inch permanently based observatory telescope, and I want to see if I can see any comets during the eclipse. I'm collaborating with the SOHO project. You may be aware that the SOHO chronographs have been detecting thousands of comets during the 20 years since SOHO was launched. Actually, it's been close to 30 years now. And I've collaborated with the comet people at SOHO, and every eclipse I've been to since then, and there's never been a comet that has appeared right at the time of the eclipse.
Yeah.
So
Pons Brooks should be pretty interesting.
Pons Brooks will be about 25 degrees from the sun at totality. So if there is no SOHO discovered comet at the time of the eclipse, I'm hoping to go get Pons Brooks. In fact, since totality lasts over 4 to 4.5 minutes, it is conceivable that even if there is a SOHO comet, I could still get both.
Yeah.
Well, a SOHO comet would be my priority, but Pons Brooks would be the next. So
I'm looking forward to see if I can image the eclipse with Pons Brooks.
Yeah.
That would be pretty wild.
I'm sure there'll be people doing that. So
yeah. Wow. So what else have you been working on?
Well, I say going back to the work with the Las Cumbres Observatory, I'm part of one of their educational outreach efforts called Global Sky Partners, which is a series of educators around the planet who are utilizing the LCO telescopes for various educational projects and programs. About once a month, we all get together and have a Zoom meeting. In fact, we had one yesterday. And we had at least usually one or two of the educators involved will give brief presentations on the activities they're doing with their students. Yesterday, we had a presentation from an educator in the Netherlands, and we had one from Morocco.
Huh.
So, I mean, we have it just, I mean, you and I have been around long enough that we probably found this amazing. I remember being back in high school, and my dad made a long distance phone call to Santa Fe, and I thought that was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing live video chats with people in real time from all over the world.
Yes. When I started this podcast 5 or 6 years ago, I had to teach people how to use Zoom.
Yeah.
Then the pandemic came along. Everybody knows how to use Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's just amazing. I mean, just yesterday, besides those two, I mean, the guy who actually runs Global Sky Partners is in London. And so we had people from Europe, from South America, from India.
That's great.
I mean, plus here in the U.S. as well. We've had people from China. I mean, it's really amazing.
Now, you started the Earthrise Institute. Is that still an active body?
I would say it's more dormant right now. Okay. I started it as a way to kind of have a way to fulfill my career, and then HaleBop came along, which allowed me to do that to an extent. Okay. Then what caused me to kind of change its focus and rename it, came about in a year or two after HaleBop was here. There's a long story involved. I've been involved with the promoting commercial space activities here in New Mexico ever since I graduated with my doctorate. And I'd gone to one of our meetings. They're held in Las Cruces, which is about a 2-hour drive from here. And there was like an overnight affair and all that. So I was reading an interview that the recently elected president of Iran had given, where he was asking for a dialogue of civilizations between the U.S. and Iran. And I will confess that that time I had the view of Iran that most Americans have, you know, blindfolded hostages, death to the great Satan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's this guy, the president of that country, asking hey, let's sit down and talk. And he was asking for an exchange visit of scholars, and I got to thinking, okay, whether or not I'm a scholar is perhaps a debatable point, but I'm sure everybody in Iran saw that comet when it was there.
You're right. And
there was a total solar eclipse that was going to be crossing right across that country a year and a half in the future. So I didn't know where to begin. But started trying to make that happen. I took a couple of what turned out to be dead ends, but then I happened to make the right contact with an organization in D.C. called Search for Common Ground. And they made contact with people in Iran who were looking to invite Americans over for the eclipse.
Oh, wow.
And then they found out that I was interested in doing that. They brought us all together. I ended up taking a group of Americans over for the eclipse. We spent 2 weeks traveling in Iran and meeting people.
Wow. Back at that time, that must have been very interesting.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
It was an incredible time for all of us because there had been very, very few Americans in Iran at that time.
Right.
There'd been an American wrestling team that had visited the country the year before. They got quite a bit of publicity, but we were like the next group.
Okay.
That went over there, and the people were they were ecstatic to meet us and talk to us. I mean, they were just very, very friendly to us.
Very good.
And so I've kept my contacts with people in Iran ever since. They invited us back for another trip the following year, and that's why I took another group over. Some of them came over to the U.S. the year after that. I'm still in contact with some of them. So it kind of occurred to me that astronomy, since it's the same sky we all see at night, was a great way for bringing people together and building bridges. So that kind of became the focus of what I wanted Earthrise to do.
Okay.
So I've pursued activities along those lines. I've worked from everything from one of the Native American tribes that's not too far from me. I've done quite a few activities with them over the years, all the way to several years ago, I made a trip to Lebanon and spent about a week over in that country speaking with school students and what have you. It's been quite a trip.
Yeah. Wow. Outreach. That's good. You've used that Comet for getting you out there to do some outreach, and that's great.
Yeah. And Global Sky Partners, to me, I see as a continuation of that. I remember it was after one of our monthly Zoom meetings a few months ago, and just hearing all these presentations and all these discussions with people and educators all over the world. And after the meeting was over, it just hit me. Said, "This is what I really wanted Earthrise to do." So
that's nice.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, you've also authored a number of books too.
I wouldn't say a number, but there's been a handful.
Okay, you want to talk about any of those? Give them a plug.
Well, I wrote a book after the comet's discovery called Everybody's Comet. It took me a while to find a publisher because I got turned down by several big name publishers. Well, there's not going to be much interest in this. It'll only be brief. Well, of course, what do they know? But I found on a recommendation of a mutual friend, I got in touch with a mom and pop publishing outfit here in New Silver City. They agreed to take it on, and it ended up being the biggest selling book in their history.
Oh, wow.
It was
Everybody's Comet, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, it was a guide on the discovery of Hale-Bopp, and it was about comets in general, Hale-Bopp in particular. Some of that is still valid. The part of the book that tells you where and when to look for it and what to expect, that's kind of outdated now.
Right.
I still have, I bought the publishers out a few years later.
Oh.
I still have a few hundred copies of that book left. I mean, they're kind of all in boxes.
It's available on Amazon or something, though, too, isn't it?
There's probably books available on Amazon that way. Okay. But right. I still have a bunch of them. The only other book I've written that has never made it past ebook form. I wrote an autobiography back 9 years ago called The Comet Man.
Oh.
I was dealing with some emotional issues at the time. I'd had a deep personal relationship that had blown up in my face, and I was having trouble dealing with that. And then my mother died, and I just kind of withdrew for a while. And I started writing what I initially just started off as a Comet memoirs book, as for therapy.
Okay.
And then I wrote the whole thing, and then I realized I had started. It started to look like an autobiography. I said, well, maybe that's what I really want to do. So I went and rewrote the whole thing.
Oh.
And got it in final form, deliberately shooting for the 20th anniversary of the Hale-Bopp discovery. And I actually finished the final proofread and final update literally just a few days before that. It's only available as an ebook right now.
Okay.
It's on the main page of the Earthrise website. There's a link to it.
Okay. I'll put that in the show notes, so if the people are interested, they can go get it.
Okay.
Great.
That's great. I'm thinking now, of course, that was in 2015. That was 9 years ago.
Time for an update.
Yeah. Maybe it is time to do, especially if I do really slow down at the end of this year, which I'm looking at doing. All the comets that have appeared since then that I've observed. Of course, there's a lot of things that have gone on in my personal life. My personal emotional situation is much better than it was.
Well, that's good to hear.
At that time. I mean, I have a new partner now. I mentioned Vicky before. I mean, we met 7 years ago. We've been living together for 5 years now.
Okay.
She still puts up with me. I don't know how she does it. I keep it. I'm afraid that someday she's going to come to her senses and run away screaming into the hills, but she assures me she won't do that. But we've been together 5 years. Her father lives with us. He's been living with us for the past 4 years.
Great. Now, are you a musician?
No, I'm really not.
Okay.
I played
somewhere. I read that you were.
No, I played guitar for a church group back when I was in high school.
Okay.
But I practiced, and got to the point where I was maybe sort of halfway okay. But my younger son is a musician. He has actually a master's degree in music.
Oh my!
Although he did find out that it was hard to get a job that way, so he went back to school and got his bachelor's in electrical engineering. And now he works on radar systems out of civil service out of Holloman Air Force Base.
Oh, okay.
Here in New Mexico. So, and he picked up a guitar and within an hour was better than I ever was.
Oh my!
Yeah.
But music has been a passion of yours, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I came of age in early 70s, really. Music came of age. I mean, I was raised on old time country music from my parents, and then I kind of drifted over to rock in the early 70s, and so I've been a rock and roller ever since. But I actually listen to just about anything.
Okay.
And I back about, oh gosh, it's been 20 years now. Has it been that long? Yes, it has been. I knew a gentleman in Alamogordo who was bringing a new radio station online, and we had talks off and on. And for about 2 years, I had a weekly gig on his radio station that I called "The Other Side of the Sky." That's a title that I stole from an Arthur C. Clarke book. Although I did write, Arthur Clarke and I actually corresponded with each other on an occasional basis.
Oh, really?
And I asked his permission to use that title. And he said, "Sure, go ahead."
Yeah, very nice.
So, and I discussed lots of things, but I played music. But I played everything. And I like to joke, I could play Metallica 1 minute and one song, and then I turn around and play something from Enya the next. And then I might play a rap tune, and then I might play classical.
Wow!
So you got a real mix with me.
So you were a DJ?
Yes, I was.
Very
and
cool.
I had a blast. I actually had a blast, and I would discuss current events, and I discussed topics in space. I would interview guests from time to time. I did a special show to commemorate the anniversary of my first trip to Iran. And so I interviewed some of the people that were part of those two trips. A couple of those were astronauts. One was Rusty Schweikert, who was a lunar module pilot on Apollo 9. I didn't interview him, but on our second trip, Bruce McCandless.
Oh, okay.
Who he's most famous for being in that iconic image of the astronaut floating in the MMU.
Right.
But if you talk to him, he was actually most proud of the fact that he was part of the shuttle team that deployed the Hubble Space Telescope.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was proud of that. But Bruce and his then wife, Bernice, accompanied me on our second trip to Iran. So, I mean, I interviewed Bruce and I interviewed some of the other people. And I called one of my contacts in Iran as for that call. I mean, we, of course, obviously arranged this ahead of time because it was about 2:30 in the morning, his time. But he duly got up and talked to us on the phone for about 15, 20 minutes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
what's your go-to music you listen to now?
I listen to still basically rock.
Okay.
I like some of the newer bands.
Okay.
Some of my favorite current bands are Vampire Weekend, Imagine Dragons,
okay,
Arcade Fire.
I've heard of one of those. Okay.
Which one have you heard of?
Imagine Dragons.
Yeah, well, they've had some real big ones. They're real big. I really recommend Vampire Weekend. They're very, very good.
Okay. Is this like metal?
No, they're kind of like indie rock. I guess if I had to decide my favorite genre, kind of indie rock. I've really gotten into that over the last several years.
Okay, but you said you were raised on country.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking Johnny Cash, Marty Robbins, Sonny James. Back in the early '80s, when I was in the Navy and stationed in San Diego, I got to go see Johnny Cash perform live in concert, and I treasure that occasion.
Oh my God!
And this is a story I'll tell. If you discover an asteroid, you get naming privileges.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, now most of the asteroids are now being discovered by surveys.
Right.
But if an asteroid has not been named within 10 years of its numbering, naming rights go to whoever. I mean, the Discoverer no longer has that. So there's tons and tons and tons and tons of main belt asteroids that don't have names. And I happen to know Gareth Williams, who is retired director of the Minor Planet Center, and said, "Can I suggest some names? May I?" He said, "Well, send them, write up citations, and we'll put it before the board. The small names, small bodies names committee, the IEU." So I prepared a list of several names, and one of the names that I suggested was Johnny Cash, and they accepted that. There actually is an asteroid named Johnny Cash. I think it's 10105, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
I could probably look that up while we're talking, but
that's very cool.
So, and through the Las Cumbres Observatory, I took some images of Johnny Cash when it was near opposition about a year and a half or so ago. And about 2 or 3 hours apart, so you can see its motion.
Right.
And I contacted the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville and said, "Do you want it?" They said, "Sure." So I sent them a couple of images. I don't know what they did with them. But
that's very cool.
Yeah. So
that's a good honor for Johnny Cash, the Man in Black.
I completely agree. 10505, Johnny Cash.
Okay. Very cool.
And that followed from another story. Back in 2020, I conducted an online program called Ice and Stone 2020, which was a global educational effort on the small bodies of the solar system. And I was commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Hale-Bopp discovery and the 50th anniversary of my first comet observations. And I did put together a presentation on main belt asteroids, and I wanted to illustrate an asteroid moving over a period of time. So I took some images of asteroid number 4151, which happens to be named Alan Hale. I have David Levy and the Shoemakers to thank for that.
No, that was very nice.
Yeah, so I mean, I chose that asteroid for obvious reasons. So I had a couple of images, and I showed them to Vicky to see if she could spot it. It was a pretty rich Milky Way star field. Said, "Can you spot this asteroid?" Well, she didn't spot it, but she did find another asteroid in the same field.
Wow.
That actually was dimmer than mine.
Oh my.
So I went and tried to identify which one it was. Well, it was one that had been discovered by the Linear program back around 2000. Had been numbered for a good long while, but was not named. I happened to know Grant Stokes, who was the PI of the Linear program. I contacted him. He said, "Well, it's been over 10 years, naming rights." So I asked Gareth if the small body's named to me would be willing to name it after my partner Vicky, and they did.
Very nice,
because she inadvertently rediscovered it.
There you go.
The images. So
there you go.
So her last name is Mosley. Her maiden name is Stone. So the asteroid's name is Stone Mose, which was her idea.
Very
so
cool.
If you go to the Earthrise website, but I got a special domain for the Ice and Stone program called halebop.org.
Okay.
So if you go to halebop.org, it'll take you directly to the Ice and Stone page. Under special topics, the week one is on main belt asteroids, and I've posted those images. And I think on the main page I had Alan Hale annotated, but I left the other one as an exercise for the reader, but then I have a link to where it actually shows that. At that time, we didn't have the name Stone Mose hadn't been approved yet, so I had to use its designation and its number. But for at least for a little while in time, she and I were together in space.
There you go. Very sweet.
So as I kind of put it at, date an astronomer who else can promise you the sun, moon, and stars and deliver? Well, I actually gave her a rock in space with her name on it.
There you go. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have Rik Hill name one after me a few years back. It's kind of a cool honor.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Nice. This is fantastic. Anything else you want to share with us today?
I don't know if anything I can come up with off the top of my head.
Okay.
Ice and Stone, the presentations are still valid, although some of them are starting to get outdated now.
Okay.
I mean, it's been 4 years, and a lot happens. I mean, we've had things like the Osiris-Rex mission has come back.
Right.
With all these things. A couple of the missions have launched. Psyche and Lucy have launched since then. Of course, there's been some interesting comets that have come by since then, as there always are. I thought about, do I want to revive that? I don't know. I did that as a labor of love, but if I were to do that again, I think I would want some funding for it. Just because, like I said, I may write a second edition of the Comet Man at some point in the not too distant future. It seems how I go. I really am enjoying my work with the Global Sky Partners. I think that I really get off on that, working with all these educators from around the world. I am hooking up with an effort by an organization called the Earthlight Foundation.
Okay.
And they're kind of looking at building part of the whole concept of building spacefaring future for humanity. But one of the things they're doing is they're working with Celestron to donate telescopes to schools around the country and eventually around the world. So I'm kind of agreed to be their technical advisor, so to speak.
Oh, very good.
They've just kicked off their program. They had their first donation to some schools in Texas a couple of months ago, and they're going forward from there. I do like the project. It's called Dreamscopes is the name of the project, and we'll see how. I'm hoping that can come through in a big way. We'll see. One of the people I'm working with, and this is, if you don't know her already, be prepared for her. There's a young lady named Pranvera Hysini.
She's been on the podcast, and she's going to be on it. She's going to be on again in a few weeks. Yes.
You know Pran. Okay.
I know Pran very well. Yeah.
You know to watch out for her.
She's a little spark plug, man.
Oh, she absolutely is. Well, some of her telescopes that she had gotten for her planetarium in Kosovo, they were damaged in a car accident.
You're right.
Really. So I'm working with Earthlight Foundation and Dreamscopes project to replace some of those telescopes for her.
Yeah, and the observatory just opened too, the one that was built. So we're having her on to talk about the observatory in a few weeks as well.
Yeah, well, and I would just advise the community, keep your eye on her. I think she's really going to go places.
Yeah, I think, she's a powerhouse.
She is.
Yeah.
I met her at a conference in Tucson, Space Fest in Tucson, a few years ago. She came up and introduced herself to me. If I was my son's age, I'd probably be interested in her as a lady.
You're not the only astronomer I know that said that.
But since she's so much younger than me, I mean, I like her as a person.
Right.
Yes, and I think she's just a perfect person. She's a woman, and I want to see more and more women involved in this.
Yes,
because they're half of the human race, and they have half the brain power. If not,
I think more. I think more.
I tend to agree with you.
Yes,
and we really need to unlock and unleash that brain power.
Yes, we do.
And I'm happy to see someone like her, in her generation, really pushing things forward. So yes,
that's she's doing very good. Well, Alan, this has been a real pleasure having you on the podcast. We've met before years ago, probably at Riverside.
Probably, if you were at that Riverside then.
I went 25 straight years, so I'm sure. Okay. I'm sure we ran into each other one time or another.
I was a pretty regular attender back in the early to mid 80s.
Yeah, so was I. So
so we probably did cross paths then.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. Again, I want to thank Alan Hale for coming on the podcast today. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. If you want to, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and give us a rating, and I'd really appreciate it. You can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Echo, Spotify, and this podcast is also available on the ALPO YouTube channel. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon, where you can give up to $35 a month, where you'll receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and can producer credits on the podcast. With that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support of the Observer's Notebook. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, is in the show notes. You can contact me via email at cometman@cometman.net or on Twitter at observersnbpod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.